Okay, we have been doing sine law and cosine law. We have practiced the sine law and cosine law separately. Your next job is to be able to look at a group of triangles and decide whether to use the sine law or the cosine law, and to be confident in that decision and know how to use it. So I've got 4 triangles here. Basically, when we look at some triangles, we will look carefully at the picture and look where the numbers are in the diagram. So I'm going to start with the first diagram. If I look here, first thing I notice, and a student that's confident with their trig will notice, is that there's an angle labeled across from a side, plus one other side. And if I look at the next picture, I look at it and the same thing happens. There's an angle labeled across from a side and plus one other thing. That one other thing is an angle this time. Whenever that happens, when you have a pair across from each other, a pair of numbers, an angle and a side that are across from each other, plus one other number, that's always the sine law. So you know to use the sine law when you're given, excuse me, when you're given a pair across from each other. Not only that, you need a pair across from each other, but you need one other number. And then you can set up your sine law, put what you don't know on the top, move it over and multiply and solve, just like you were doing with your sine law questions. For these other 2 pictures, I'll look at them and they're a little bit different. There's no angle and side, there's no pair like with the sine law. The first one tells me the lengths of all 3 sides, but no angle. The second one tells me an angle, but there's no side across from it like the sine law. This time there's a side and a side on either side of the angle. This is called having a contained angle. That means it's between the 2 sides. When you have either of those situations, when you know all 3 side lengths, or you have a contained angle, that's when you use the cosine law. And if you recall, when we did the cosine law, there are 2 versions of the cosine law. One version is to calculate a length. Looks something like this. The letters don't really matter, as long as you're remembering, excuse me, that the side you're calculating and the angle in the formula are across from each other. So if I went back to my picture, let me move this out of the way. If I went back to my picture up here, if I know angle R, I'd be able to figure out side R using the cosine law. And if I know all 3 sides, I can figure out an angle. So this formula lets you figure out a length of a side, and we can also figure out an angle by using the other version. Oops. Let me fix that formula for you here. Cos A equals b squared plus c squared minus a squared over 2bc. There we go. Better have the right formula. And same thing. The angle you're figuring out and the side you subtract are going to be across from each other. So if I go back to my picture up here, I can figure out any of the angles, but whatever side I put in the subtracting place has to be across from the angle that I'm finding. So if I subtract 5.8 in my formula, I'm figuring angle N. If I subtract the 8.7, let me see if I can fit this all on the screen. Of course I can't. If I subtract the 8.7, then I'm going in my formula right here. Then I'm figuring angle L. If I subtract the 13.9, then I'm figuring out angle M at the top. So whatever you subtract is the angle you're figuring out. And we should have been practicing that in previous lessons. So your job now is to do the sheet of questions with mixed sine and cosine law questions. Your job with every triangle, look at each picture carefully. If you have a side and an angle across from each other, sine law. If you know all three sides, cosine law. If you have an angle between two sides, cosine law.